May was a really good reading month for me. I read 12 novels and half a short story collection. I think that's the best monthly tally this year so far. Let's take a look at what I read in the order that I read them, and as we go, I'll tier rank them mercilessly and ultimately declare a book of the month. I read Sanctuary by Dave Hutchinson. This is the third book in the Aftermath series. We are back in the same world as the first two books, 100-ish years after a comet strike has wiped out most of the world. In the south of England, very local to me, in fact, people are hanging on, trying to farm in what are still dreadful conditions, very wet and dreary. Adam Hardy, a handy sort of fella, is an agent of Guz, formerly Plymouth, the site of a naval base. Plymouth is reasonably well organised, comparatively speaking, and the forces of Guz are beginning to expand their footprint, their regional influence. They hear tell that in Oxford, a couple of hundred miles away, things are afoot, and Adam is sent to see what's what. Adam arrives in Oxford and is immediately detained. They were expecting him, or they were expecting someone. He's surprised to find that Oxford is bustling, thriving even, and is policed by the Thames Valley Police, descendants of the present day cops for the region. The colleges of Oxford University and the city leaders run the place, but all is not as it seems. Strangers are appearing in police uniform, long-standing coppers are disappearing, transferred to another role, and senior officers are replaced with no warning. Inspector Leonie Mello isn't sure what's going on. She just wants to be good police and to nick villains. She and Adam end up working as a team to find out what's behind the sudden spate of murders and disappearances. Is it connected to a past gang war? Is there a serial killer? Is it corrupt cops? Or is it the sinister dealings of the mysterious Father John, a charismatic leader that no one seems to have seen? I love being back in this world, once more enjoying the local setting. And I liked how the world is much bigger for these people. What would be a simple journey of half an hour in a car today can be days of trudging across dangerous open country in shocking weather. I enjoyed Adam's surprised at how advanced Oxford is, even compared to Guz. They have electricity and a booming economy. I enjoyed the Inspector Mello character and the gradual unravelling of the mysteries. I wasn't expecting a police procedural from this book, but there were definite overtones of that. It's a good book. I enjoy Dave Hutchinson's writing and I enjoy this setting very much. 8 out of 10, a stellar splendour. Next, I read Dragonquest, the second of the original Pern trilogy, a stark contrast to Sanctuary in every way. I struggled through it, mostly regretting my time with it, certain that I could have been reading a much better book or two or three in the week that it took me to get through it. A week. Fair enough for a chunky book, but this isn't chunky. I was irrationally annoyed by all the apostrophes in the male Dragon Riders' names, but mainly I just didn't care enough about the characters, the story, or any of it, really. I was confused by all the holds and the crafts and the blah-de-blah. What I should have done is drop it at 100 pages, or before even, but for some reason I kept going, sort of on annoyed autopilot. It was poor, frankly, and more for me for not doing the sensible thing and DNFing it. In a fit of pique, I've since sold nearly all the Perm books I had, freeing up some nice shelf space for more A-format books. There's simply no room on my shelves for books that don't give me joy. To be fair to Pern, I think if I'd read them when I was younger, I can imagine I might have loved them, but as a crusty old cynic in my 50s, not so much. I'm afraid I have no choice but to classify Dragonquest as a paltry 4 out of 10, a cosmic catastrophe, and I think that might be the first one that I've had since using this ranking scale. Very, very disappointing. Next was Lord Valentine's Castle, which thankfully couldn't have been more different. Published in 1980, this is a science fantasy, one of those kind of in-betweeny books that's neither science fiction nor fantasy. On the face of it, Lord Valentine's Castle is an epic fantasy. It's a quest, a tale of one man's destiny and the odyssey that he undertakes to seek it out. But it also has many sci-fi trimmings. There's travel between the stars, there's a starport on Magipur, the planet where the action takes place, but we don't go anywhere near it or any spaceships. There are energy throwers, a blaster of some kind, there are anti-gravity devices which levitate vehicles, there's a vibrating sword, there are synthetic animals, or their descendants at least, and of course there are several alien species who at various times have colonised Magipur along with the humans. Magipur is enormous, significantly larger than Earth, with an agreeable climate and lower density than Earth, with slightly lower gravity as a result. In the time of the book, Magipur is peaceful, and it's run as an absolute monarchy of sorts, with power shared between the Coronal, the Pontifex, the King of Dreams, and the Lady of the Isle. The Coronal is the visible, tangible face of this worldwide governance model, and Lord Valentine is the current occupant of the throne in the titular castle. We are introduced to his namesake, Valentine, a drifter with no possessions and just the clothes on his back, and oddly, no memory either. He soon takes up with Shanamir, a passing herder taking his family animals to market in the nearby city of Padruin, and then he falls in with a troop of jugglers who need an extra human, according to the latest of a series of odd and vexatious decrees from the recently installed Coronal. Our Valentine is a blank slate. He's no memory, but his easygoing attitude means that he makes friends as he goes, gradually getting glimpses of his past via dreams. Dreams are important on Magipur. They are directed or sent and have meanings which are interpreted, if needed, by a dream speaker. Lord Valentine's castle follows our Valentine as he accumulates a band of friends and realises that he is not just a drifter and becomes aware of his true identity and seeks to return home and claim his rightful destiny. The principal joy of this book for me was in Silverberg's world building. The descriptions of the wildlife, the towns and cities, the plants, the people, both human and non-human, are very vivid and beautiful. I was immersed. Like many a planetary romance before it, Valentine's quest, his odyssey, is a perfect excuse to take us on a tour of Magipur. At times, the book feels more like a travel log, a beautifully written tour guide. Valentine and his growing group of friends and followers travel across 2 continents, enduring trials and misfortunes along the way. We suspect and then learn of Valentine's true identity early on, and it's in black and white on the back of the book. From that point on, it seems obvious where the story is headed. We can guess where it will end, so there's no real mystery there. And you know what? Maybe that's a downside to this plot structure, but fortunately, Lord Valentine's castle is not really about the destination. It's really all about the journey, and what a journey it is. Geographically, of course, but also a personal journey for Valentine and his agglomeration of fellow travellers. I listened to this on audiobook, and the narration is excellent. I really love this book. It's top-notch stuff. 9 out of 10, a slam dunk, galactic gem. Next was Mindbridge by Joe Haldeman, which was a quick read at under 170 pages and with short, bite-sized chapters to boot. I polished it off inside a day. Mindbridge is a tale of interstellar travel via an instantaneous jump system. One drawback is that anything sent will return in a specified time, and that the zone of transmission is quite small, so that a survey team must kind of stack vertically and keep their arms tucked in to avoid losing limbs. The main protagonists are Jacques Lefavre and Carol Wachel. Both are so-called tamers, employees of the corporation tasked with exploiting this tech to terraform planets ready for future waves of human colonisation. And it's a risky profession with a high mortality rate. On one trip, Jacques and Carol are in a tamer team that encounters life in the form of some aquatic creature, which facilitates telepathic communication between the 2 people that are touching the creature, the mind bridge of the title. There are some nice touches in the story. The first person to touch one of these creatures dies shortly afterwards, so much so that the authorities start to recruit people with suicide tendencies to be the first toucher. And on realising that anything of a destination world snaps back there if brought back to Earth, the corporation starts hiring women on the basis that they agree to conceive a certain number of children, thus guaranteeing a foothold on the far-flung world, avoiding the need for costly generation ships and their lengthy missions. Inevitably, Jacques and Carol are intrigued by the possibility of telepathy-boosted sex and give it a try, lots of times. Jacques turns out to be uniquely sensitive from a telepathy point of view and ends up being the only conduit for communication with an expanding alien race that they've encountered on their trips to other worlds. I blew through Mindbridge pretty fast, and it's rather work a day, nothing special or particularly noteworthy, but I enjoyed myself while I was there. 7 out of 10. A planetary pleasure. Newton's Wake by Ken MacLeod was next. There's a lot going on in this book, and I think for me it suffered a bit as a result. I struggled to keep it straight in my head. At some point in the past, humans were devastated by a military AI takeover. If you think Skynet in Terminator, you won't be far wrong, but with the added assimilation of humans into some form of post-human AI mashup that left Earth in something called the Hard Rapture, going who knows where, and leaving only relics behind. What's left of humanity is split into many factions. There's America Offline, who are essentially farmers who shun most forms of tech. There's the Knights of Enlightenment, who seem mainly to be Japanese or East Asian in origin. And then there's the Democratic Communist Union, who seem to emanate mostly from North Korea. And there's the Carlisle clan, a group of Scottish black marketeers that also control the scheme, a network of portals or wormholes. And if that wasn't enough, there's a long-lost colony of humans on the planet Eurydice who are doing very nicely, thank you very much. And that's not even all of the factions. Bewildering at times, there were things that I liked about this book. The main character, Lucinda Carlyle, is enjoyably no-nonsense and still speaking in what seems to me to be a broad Glaswegian accent. She is a combat archaeologist of all things. She and her team seek out relics with the objective of exploiting them for gain, and they go about that armed to the teeth. I like some of the terminology. MacLeod talks of spaceships fiddling in and out of places, and for a while I assumed that fiddling was a dialect word meaning move or something, but then it dawned on me that he'd made a verb of the abbreviation FTL. Mainly, I felt that Newton's Wake was a bit of a jumble. Maybe I tried to read it too quickly, or maybe it just wasn't for me. I think it would be too strong to say that I was disappointed, but I guess it didn't meet my expectations, which perhaps were elevated after mainly enjoying the Full Revolution books. So I'm just going to chalk this one up as a bit of a miss and move on. 6 out of 10, a nebulous narrative. On audiobook, I finished Century Reign by Alastair Reynolds, one of the few books of his that I haven't read before. And I really enjoyed it. There are two plot threads which start quite separately but get more connected as the book progresses before ultimately collapsing into one thread. There's a detective noir element set in 1959 Paris, but we rapidly become aware that this is a different Paris in a different 1959 to the one that we know. World War II didn't happen, or rather it did, but Nazi Germany was defeated quickly on the French border. No war means no technology advances, so tech is kind of stuck in our 1930s. The main character in this timeline is Wendell Floyd, an American, a failed musician and part-time investigator living in Paris. He and his partner, an ex-cop, are engaged to investigate a suspicious death. Their client is Monsieur Blanchard, the elderly friend and landlord of the victim, Susan White. There's lots of black and white movie feels to this thread. I kind of imagined Humphrey Bogart playing Floyd. There's a lot of clue finding and chasing down leads, mysterious children seen in the vicinity, bootleg records, strange documents and disappearances. The police aren't interested in the case. In their view, it's obviously suicide. She's just jumped out the window. The other thread is set 200 or 300 years in our future. Earth has been devastated by something called the Nanocaust, and what remains of humanity live elsewhere in the solar system, the descendants of the few that were not on the surface of the planet at the time of the disaster. There are two main groups or factions. The Threshers mainly live in Tanglewood, a halo of habitats orbiting Earth, and the Slashers, who live further out, embracing the feared nanotech to enhance their health, their longevity, their perceptions and processing power, you name it. The Threshers and the Slashers have fought at least one messy war and are on the brink of another. Anyway, the main character from this thread is Verity Auger, a Thresher, and we first meet her on Earth on an archaeological dig in a frozen Paris. One of her party, a young person, is injured on her watch and later dies, and she's held responsible and faces trial and jail time. She's offered a way out by a shady secret Thresher agency. To cut a long story short, Auger ends up being sent via a portal network to Floyd's version of Paris to continue the work of Susan White, who was also a Thresher agent. There ensues much chaos and mayhem and planetary peril for the world of Floyd's Paris. I enjoyed the noir aspects of the book, and the elements set in our future were interesting too. And I thought that Reynolds did a good job knitting both threads together. And I don't know how I managed to skip this book for 20 years, but I'm glad I finally got around to it. 8 out of 10. A stellar splendour. Wanting something to clear my head a bit, I decided to read Dark Matter next by Blake Crouch. This is a page-turner, an airport thriller with some science fiction trimmings. The protagonist, Jason Desson, is happy enough with his so-so academic career, having forgone his cutting-edge research in favour of his young wife and son. And one day he's abducted on the way home from a bar, and thus begins a cascade of parallel world action. I won't try to outline the complicated plot, but suffice to say there are a lot of parallel worlds, some of them really messed up. Jason's objective is to get back to his own world and to oust the version of himself that has taken his place. The pacing is good. I enjoyed the tension and the jeopardy and the variety of worlds that Jason has to visit to try to find his way back. And I enjoyed the mid-plot twist, which I really didn't see coming. This is not a demanding book. I burned through it in a few hours and I had fun while I was there. I don't think it will linger long in the mind, having said that. 7 out of 10. A planetary pleasure. Next was In the Ocean of Night by Gregory Benford, also on audiobook. And this one opens with Nigel Walmsley, a British astronaut working for NASA, on a mission to divert a comet fragment, Icarus, that is predicted to hit the Earth with the usual devastating results. On closer inspection, he finds that it's not a comet fragment at all, it's artificial, an alien relic, a spaceship carved from rock. He refuses the order to destroy Icarus, wanting to explore further the interior. After extracting some bits and pieces of Icarus, he and his partner Len do eventually blow the thing all to hell as planned. Nigel is not exactly welcomed home with open arms. NASA are pissed off with him for not following the plan, and the rest of the world is pissed off at him for playing fast and loose with the fate of the world. And he enjoys a period of notoriety as a result, but the fuss fades over time. Then there's the first of a few skip forwards in time. Someone or something is jamming the signals from monitoring stations around Jupiter. Nigel is once more called on to investigate and concludes that something has come along to investigate the destruction of Icarus. This is a tale of slow revelations of one man's campaign to understand and to warn his fellow men. Are these two ships a warning, or are they the vanguard of something altogether more sinister? There are further alien relics, a burgeoning religious movement, worsening pollution on Earth, a polyamorous relationship, and hints of unseen threats. I like Nigel as a character, and I enjoyed his fish out of cultural war to attitude, his rational thought process and his ability to cut through the nonsense. And he shows some flair for political manoeuvring too, a necessary evil to achieve funding and navigate the bureaucracy within NASA and the US government. Being a bit of a nerd myself, I also enjoyed Benford's scientific rigour. He's a physics professor by trade and it shows, but it's not too dry. A bit like Timescape, another of his books that I enjoyed recently, it has a nice balance of human relationships in it too. In the Ocean of Night is the first book of what ultimately became the Galactic Centre sequence, a series of 6 books which chronicle a galaxy-wide war between mechanical and organic beings. I think In the Ocean of the Night tees that up quite nicely, and I give it 7 out of 10, a planetary pleasure. Next was Marrow by Robert Reed. This is a book of impressive scale. It's set on a great ship, a mind-bogglingly big spaceship that was believed to have been constructed from a gas giant billions of years ago. The ship was found by humans, deserted but fully functioning, and it's now crewed by genetically enhanced humans who are effectively immortal. These captains, with a capital C, are trusted to run the ship, to keep it on course and to manage the environmental safety for the many billions of humans and alien species that call it home. After some scene setting, the elite of the captains is summoned by ancient security protocols to gather secretly deep in the ship, and they're given a secret mission to explore the concealed inner core of the ship. What they find there is astonishing, but they're soon trapped. With just a few hundred very resourceful captains, they must survive and adapt and find a way to escape. What is initially a super hostile environment is eventually tamed and some sort of civilization thrives, a process that takes thousands of years. Meanwhile, back in the rest of the ship, their absence is a big mystery. Where did they go and why and who sent them? I like the strange world of Marrow, and I thought that the captains were well drawn and yet odd. Their perspective is very different. They think in terms of multiple lifetimes. Their plans are long term. Factions develop though, and a religion forms, and there's some body horror, technology is developed, and ultimately the captains and their descendants reach beyond the Marrow and into the ship proper with very different motivations and with interesting results. I maybe found it a little bit difficult to get into, but once I got a fifth of the way in, I was very happy to continue on. I think that there are several other books and a multitude of short stories set in the same universe. 7 out of 10, a planetary pleasure. Next was Cage of Souls by Adrian Tchaikovsky on audiobook again. The summary version here is that I really, really enjoyed this book. Cage of Souls is a dying Earth tale. We're in the far, far future. The sun is dying, possibly of natural causes, but possibly because of some ill-advised intervention by us humans at some point in the past. The known world is reduced to one city, Shadrapar, home to at most a couple of 100,000 people. The sea is dreadfully polluted. The land around Shadrapar is desert, scattered with relics of times past, and the source of many trinkets and valuable items. There's also a jungle upriver from Shadrapar, which is the location of the island, a prison of sorts, home to criminals, debtors and political prisoners. Our protagonist is Stefan Advani, recently consigned to a lengthy term in the island, the result of crossing someone that he shouldn't have crossed. And as the story progresses, we get lengthy flashbacks to Stefan's past life, which allows us to get more familiar with both Stefan and Shadrapar and its society. We're introduced to a large cast of characters: fellow prisoners, old friends, new friends, enemies, warders, scholars, criminals, corrupt officials. This might have been challenging, but between Tchaikovsky's excellent world building and David Thorpe's really compelling narration, I was seldom confused and mainly very much enjoyed luxuriating in this strange place. Evolution has gone bananas, accelerated by the challenging conditions, and there are technology relics all over the place. Stefan is a likeable main character, and we grow a little with him as he develops coping mechanisms for his time on the island, accumulating loyal friends along the way. I've mentioned the narration, but it is worth saying, I think, that if you haven't read this book and you like a dying Earth story, then I'd really recommend listening to it on audiobook if you can. I'm sure I'd have enjoyed just reading the physical book, but the narration was so good, I think it added a good 10% to my enjoyment. It's very, very good. Cage of Souls can join Lord Valentine's Castle on 9 out of 10, a galactic gem. Edge of Human by K.W. Jeter was next, the sequel to the Blade Runner movie. Jeter doubles down on the lingering question of whether Deckard is himself a replicant by having nearly everyone in the book at one point or another be accused of being, turn out to be, or deny being a replicant. He also introduces the concept of a templant, the original human upon which a line of replicant copies is based. Not content with that, he also adds in humans that believe that they're replicants. That all adds to the fun. Is a character a templant and thus just looks like a known replicant? Or are they another model of the same line of replicants? Or is a character actually a human that's just convinced themselves that they're a replicant? Or are they just a straight up human being? Jeter does a good job of keeping us guessing throughout. The book opens with Deckard holed up in a log cabin out in the boonies somewhere, having fled at the end of the movie with Rachel, the beautiful replicant. And because replicants have a limited lifespan of 4 years, Deckard and Rachel are eking out their time together by putting her into hibernation. Deckard gets an offer he can't refuse and is pulled back into LA to hunt down the fabled 6th replicant, a missing member of Roy Batty's crew. The bulk of the book deals with his mission, dealing with layers of confusion, deception, conflicting loyalties, conspiracy, you name it. I should confess at this point that I haven't read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, so for me Edge of Human was a sequel just to the Blade Runner movie, which I've watched many times, and I think it functioned very well in that capacity. I enjoyed the noir overtones of the book, and I liked how Deckard was almost entirely without agency in this book. He was mostly a puppet on other people's strings, and all in the service of somehow extending Rachel's lifespan so that they could have more time together. I liked the twist in the tale towards the end. I didn't see that coming, and I left the book with a smile on my face. Edge of Human was a quick, fun read, and I'll definitely be reading the next one at some point, and I'll be looking out for more of K.W. Jeter's work. I give it 7 out of 10, another planetary pleasure. I read The Other Wind by Ursula Le Guin next, the 5th Earthsea book. I read the first 4 a couple of years ago, and I enjoyed them, but I only retain a kind of dim memory of the story. I think I would have benefited from a fresher recollection, but didn't find it too much of a problem to go into the Other Wind fairly cold. And as I read it, I did find that I was recalling characters and situations from the other books as they were referred to in The Other Wind. Some of the Earthsea favourites are here. There's Ged, although not very much. Tenar and Tahanu, Ged's wife and adopted daughter. The King Lebanon, plus there are dragons and a mysterious Kargish princess. There's another new character, Alder Amenda, who's tormented by dreams of the wall, the boundary between life and death. And after a bit of a trek, he visits with Ged, the retired archmage. Ged advises Alder to tell his story to King Lebanon, and there ensues some court scenes, the irritatingly positive and good King Lebanon. And the basic problem is that the dragons are in a massive huff, and the world is out of balance as a result, and Lebanon must find a solution. I enjoyed being back in this world. Le Guin's writing is wonderful, of course, and it was a quick and not especially taxing read. I give The Other Wind 7 out of 10, a planetary pleasure. During May, I also tackled Hexarchate Stories, Yoon Lee's collection set in the same universe as Nine Fox Gambit and the rest of the Machineries of Empire trilogy. I first tried to listen to these short stories on audiobook and totally failed. I listened to the same few minutes several times over before giving up. I wasn't ready to totally give up at that point, so I picked up the physical book later in the month. For me, these short stories mainly served as a reminder of the world building in the Machineries of Empire books, and some of the characters are common, albeit much earlier in their lives. I read the Machineries of Empire trilogy several years ago, and whilst they were a little bit hard work in that there's very little in the way of exposition or info dumping, you have to figure it out as you go, I remember enjoying them. I didn't love them or anything, but I was happy to read them and finish the trilogy. Because this is a short story collection, I didn't feel obliged to finish it. I got about halfway through. It was so-so. 5 out of 10 then, a nebulous narrative. All of which leaves me with something of a dilemma as far as Book of the Month goes. It's interesting that the two contenders, Lord Valentine's Castle and Cage of Souls, are both science fantasy tales rather than straight up science fiction, and both were audiobooks with terrific narration. And both have a richly described world with strange creatures and relics from a more technological past. I could just flip a coin, there's really nothing between them, and on that basis I think I'll call it a tie. My books of the month then are these two, and I commend them both to you all. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.